Hi, we're continuing with the series on parents who have children with borderline personality disorder and how to understand the disorder and how to work with the child as a parent. Um, I'm going to be talking today about I guess, the most difficult topic of all, and that is borderline children who are abusive towards their parents. Um, I have seen thousands of cases of abuse, primarily in the context of spousal and partner abuse, but I've also seen many, many cases of abuse with regard to human rights violations and persecution. Um, I see immigration cases, so these are often individuals who've come from a place where they've suffered political, um, sexual orientation, religious, some kind of group affiliated abuse or harm, um, and other kinds of abuses I've seen as well, and other kinds of forensic cases for both criminal and immigration lawyers, and even civil litigation. So I want to just first talk about what abuse is. Abuse can occur in different forms. The major areas are physical, psychological, emotional, verbal, financial, but there could also be sexual, cultural, religious abuse, and so on. The child with borderline personality disorder can be abusive in any of these ways and for various reasons. Often the abuse is targeted toward one or both parents in a specific way and a specific reason, but more specifically, because of the child's particular relationship with that parent. In other words, the borderline child, like any children, will have one relationship with mom, a different relationship with dad. Um, when abuse occurs, it has to be addressed. The borderline child can be abusive in all of these ways, ultimately making the parent feel like crap. Their self esteem is lowered, their sense of self worth, there may be self recrimination. Um, and all of these things are extremely important to deal with for many reasons. The first is you are the caretaker for this child, and you may be the caretaker for the child not just throughout their adolescent years, which can last a long time, but through their early adulthood or even beyond. And you need to establish appropriate boundaries about um, verbal and physical communication and even emotional, psychological communication. Because if you don't, you will lose yourself as a human being. Um, Moreover, when you're treated like shit, it's sometimes the case that the borderline child will generalize the treatment that he has towards you and consider that maybe this is a way that I can interact with other people outside of the home. Clearly, if the borderline child generalizes it and interacts with schoolmates or people that he's working with or she's working with in the workplace, it's going to be extremely destructive and jeopardize the borderline's child to progress academically or progress in his or her vocation. Um, the parent who's treated like crap and abused will come to believe that the abuse that they're suffering is normal. This is often what occurs in domestic violence situations where over a period of months and sometimes even just weeks, but over a period of months and years, the victim in domestic abuse will come to see the abuse as normative, that is, expected and normal and usual. And it's amazing how someone who was not previously abused can, within a relatively short time, find themselves in a groove, functioning every day, going to work, maybe even having friends and so on, but accepting the abuse that they're suffering because they justify it in their mind, or they compartmentalize the abuse they're suffering, perhaps because they say to themselves, well, this is my child, or this is a family member, or I have to be responsible to this person because I'm the parent. The kid's not the parent, I'm the parent. Nonetheless, the abuse is obviously very, very painful towards the parent. Um, what I would also say is that it may be very painful and destructive to the child. You know, we think that when the borderline child is being abusive towards the parent, that the borderline child is just throwing off steam and frustration and so on. But if the borderline child, you know, has a heart and understands these things at some level, then the borderline child will feel self-recrimination and self-hatred for demonizing and emotionally abusing the parent. The borderline child will grow up terribly angry at herself, thinking, why did I do that to my parent? I must be a terrible person. And then the borderline child may feel as an adult that he or she is not self-deserving of love, that he or she needs to replicate this unhealthy relationship where the borderline child was abusive toward the parent, as, for various reasons, maybe as self-punishment. When this occurs, when abuse towards a parent occurs, there must be a strong, unified position by both parents within the home. There also needs to be a unified position when other people are abused by the borderline in the home, including, of course, siblings, or for that matter, even animals. The borderline child must be told that the abuse is inappropriate, and the parent should be honest and say, you know, it's very hurtful when you use curse words toward me. It's very hurtful when you say I'm a useless person. It's very hurtful, you know, when you say that you want me to die. It can be debilitating for the parent. It's important to relay this to the child in an almost therapeutic psychoeducational format, sometimes in the context of family therapy, of course, so that the borderline child has these issues clarified in their mind, because the borderline child is trying to relate as best as she can to the adult, and it's not coming out right. And the child needs to understand that it's miscommunicating thoughts and feelings, or that the borderline child is sabotaging their ability to properly emotionally connect with another person. Hopefully, the borderline child will feel badly about it. If the borderline child, over a period of months and even years, has no empathy for the harm that they've caused the parent and no sense of sympathy or understanding, then it's a very serious situation, because then, you know, who doesn't feel any amount of sympathy or empathy? Perhaps a sociopath or psychopath. And honestly, in the vast majority of cases, the borderline does get that his or her actions are harmful and painful to the parent. When the borderline child lashes out towards the parent with verbal abuse that is threatening, such as "I will harm you" or "I will kill you," the parent needs to nip it in the bud by being very clear with the child about the consequences of such statements, and that they need to be taken seriously. And we'll talk about this in a subsequent video. If you're feeling constantly as a parent that you're walking on eggshells, if you're feeling that everything you're saying can potentially be wrong and lead to an argument, if you're feeling that you're suppressing your motions and your behavior in the home and what you're saying at every moment, you will become inauthentic, right? The whole point of my book and the work I'm doing is to try to help the borderline to become authentic, but you as a parent may in time become inauthentic because your sense of personal integrity and self will be very much damaged. It's also important, finally, that there are not extremes in this area. For example, one minute the borderline child may idealize you as wonderful and a great caregiver who's knowledgeable and very, very capable. And at another moment, the borderline child may demonize you and degrade you and demean you with perhaps body shaming and all sorts of expletives and verbal abuses. The idealization and the demonization are both extremes. They're opposite sides of the same coin. And while obviously it's important, as I emphasize here, that the parent contend with the moments when they're being treated like crap, they should also moderate the idealization of the borderline. In those moments, often the parent feels, oh, thank God I'm finally getting a compliment, or thank God finally my kid is saying something nice about me. It seems like it's been months or years or never. But it's really part of the same manifesting symptom, and it needs to be tempered by the parent explaining that they're not the greatest parent in the world. They're doing their best. These are difficult circumstances. Everybody's trying. We're all in therapy and so on. Over time, the goal is for the child to be able to communicate his thoughts, feelings, and behaviors in a way that is not harmful to others, while still communicating a particular thought or feeling, allowing them to be understood in a particular dyad with one parent or within the larger family system. But the bottom line that everybody should take away as a parent from this is you can't be treated like crap day after day. It'll eat you away, and it's not helpful to the borderline child.